My name is Dave Brill. That's a D-A-V-E. Last name is Brill, and I'm a full-time COCME instructor. I've been here since 1998, so almost 25 years. So I grew up here in Southern California. Was born in Van Nuys, grew up in Encino, and about the time I got through high school, I was really interested in getting into journalism. I really wanted to go away somewhere outside of California. My parents I don't think weren't too excited about that, or at least my mom wasn't. My dad lived in Colorado, so my parents were split, and so I literally grew up with my mom in the San Fernando Valley. My dad lived outside of Denver, Colorado, and so I really wanted to go to Denver. So I started looking at the University of Colorado. They had a great journalism program. Applied for Colorado, got in there, moved there. Literally, I remember graduating high school in like late June of 1984. It was the year the Olympics were here in Los Angeles, and so got a chance to experience that. And then literally like 2 days after the Olympics were over, got in my car and drove to Colorado. At Colorado, interestingly enough, I went there to be a print journalist, meaning I wanted to write for newspapers. And I met my roommate who was from Denver, and he's like, hey, I'm going down to the radio station, and you want to kind of tag along? And I said, sure. And so walked down to the radio station with him. There was another guy there who was looking for broadcast people. And I had never thought about broadcast in my life. And he said, hey, I need someone to do little news cut-ins. Are you interested? And I said, well, I'd never thought about doing that before. And he's like, well, give it a try. So literally, he hands me a script. And so the DJ points at me, and I talk 1,000 miles an hour. I feel like I'm sweating. I mean, it's the most ridiculously worst experience I think I can ever imagine. And for whatever reason, I was hooked. Spent my 4.5 years at Colorado, did everything from the campus radio station. I would do sports events. I would do play-by-play at the games, and it kind of led me into this sort of track that I knew I was going to be a broadcast person. Yeah, so I came back to LA for a short time, figuring I was only going to be here for a couple of weeks, and my job was going to happen, and it didn't quite happen that way. While I was waiting and trying to get myself sort of situated, I was working back at the golf course as a caddy, in club storage. I was working in a restaurant. I was doing everything but what I really wanted to, I went to school for. About a year later, a friend of mine who had graduated a year ahead of me, who was working in a small TV station in Nebraska, and he called me and he said, hey, I haven't put my 2 weeks notice in. Put your tape, FedEx the news director your tape. And he goes, and when I get your tape, then I'll turn my 2 weeks in. Throw my tape together, FedEx it, say I've done it. And so he goes in, he turns in his 2 weeks notice, and he says, hey, I'm giving you my 2 weeks notice, but there's this guy that wants a gig. Well, the news director saw my tape and said, there's absolutely no way, he's terrible. So I just kept calling him. And I literally called him 4, 5, 6 times, and finally he said, okay, he called me back, on a Monday, and he said, all right, well, you're hired. Can you be here by Thursday? Of course I say yes. When am I going to say no? I wrapped up my entire life out here in Southern California, drove to Nebraska, got there in time to say goodbye to my friend, who was then, obviously, as I said, going to Missouri. And I actually moved into his apartment. And then literally, that was on a Thursday. Yeah, it was on a Thursday. I moved into his apartment. He left Friday. And I literally, the following Monday, told his landlord that I was living in his place. And she said, well, as long as you're paying the rent, I don't care who lives here. When I got to Cheyenne, the guy that was anchoring at the time was this brand new kid out of Colorado State. Had never been on camera in his life, and he was not good. Literally, almost the day I got there, said, I'm going to switch you guys. 2.5 months into that job, I sent a tape up to Rapid City. And Rapid City had an opening for a reporter up there, kind of what I want to do in Cheyenne. And basically, they said, if you want the job, it's yours. And, it was a good experience. Unfortunately, threw my back out trying to do the job. And then I stepped away to try to heal, to get it better. And it didn't quite heal up as fast as I would have liked. And so I moved back here. And then while I was back here, got an opportunity to go to work as in the production business, and actually the film side of things. Went working for a production company over in Hollywood, and then that show that I got put on got canceled, and so I went back to Cheyenne, where my friends still were from the first time I worked from that 3-month stint. And I decided to go sit down with the same news director that threw me out of the station. So I went in there and he goes, well, I have a job opening if you want it. So I spent 4 years in Cheyenne. As luck or unluck would have it, I wound up hurting my back again, woo, right? And so at that point I kind of made a decision that I kind of knew that I wasn't going to probably continue on in front of the camera. I was better at actually the behind the scenes stuff. I learned how to do all these different things and all these different skills, and then realized that I was getting more phone calls to be a photographer than I was an anchor. And I realized that physically I just probably wasn't going to hold up to being full-time photographer at that point. So, you know, when my back went out that second time, I'm like, well, I think I'm done. You know, I'm going to have to figure it out. But, you know, got out of my apartment, moved back to Los Angeles, tail between my legs a second time. I had a sister who was teaching here at College of the Canyons full-time. She had just been hired in like 1997. This was 1998 now. And she said, have you ever thought about teaching? And I said, no, you know, wasn't like ever on my radar. And she says, well, I think you might do a good job at it. You know, you've learned a lot in the almost 10 years you've been in the business, and, you know, you can bring that perspective to the classroom. And you know, I said, well, I guess maybe. I said, but I need to go back to class, you know. I said, so I can remember what it's like to be taught, you know. So that's what I did, honestly. In the fall of 1998, came back here as a student, because at that point, these things were starting to really come into, you know, play, computers. And I grew up in an analog world. And so I wound up taking 2 classes literally across the hall. And then I had an opportunity to become like a part-time instructor in the fall of 1998. So that's what I did. I applied in a blatant display of nepotism. My sister basically, you know, had whoever she was working with interview me, and they hired me, you know, like that was ever going to be a doubt. And so I started teaching here. Again, feeling the same kind of like nerves that I felt like when I got in front of a microphone for the first time. You would think that after 10 years of being on the air and talking to people that you wouldn't get nervous, but man, public speaking really scares the crap out of me. Although now I'm gotten a lot more used to it. It's funny, like, so I don't think news is dying. So we talked today about newspapers. I think newspapers are dying because no one's reading newspapers anymore. But I really do think that there's always going to be a hunger for news. You know, it's just that we're getting it on Twitter, right? Or our phones, we're getting it on our desktop computers, we're getting it on our radio, we're getting it through word of mouth, because the people that were used to doing that, unfortunately, are getting older. You know, and as they get older and further away, you know, the people replacing them don't have the same kind of habit with how they get their news, right? Anyone basically under my age is getting it from all sorts of different sources, but they're certainly not getting it with newspapers. So to answer your question, is news dead? No. Is news dying? No. But it's certainly more challenging, I think, right now to find the center of what news is, right? And I think if the business can get back to just like laying it out there, telling a story, not coming in from a certain angle, and letting you guys decide where you stand on it, I think it will make the news industry stronger. People are always interested in stories, right? They're always interested in as much as they say they're not, there's always going to be some kind of curiosity out there for things that happen on our planet. Challenges for me, I'll say in a more general sense, and I think it started early, is that I was never a classically trained teacher. You know, I'll sit in a meeting and, you know, they'll start throwing out like terminology, and it might as well be Greek, you know, to me, you know? Over time, I've gotten to appreciate this job a lot more than I think I did initially. And it's, you know, and a lot of it's because A, I'm more comfortable with it, but B, I just feel like I'm making a difference here, and I don't feel like me cutting a 45-second highlight at Channel 7 with the Lakers. As much as I enjoy that, I don't think in the grander scheme of things that means, you know, that doesn't really mean much. But what it does mean is like getting an opportunity to like talk to you guys and maybe finding something that you know, that I can kind of get you guys to be fired up about and leading to some kind of like career path for you. And that's a whole lot more rewarding than me just, you know, doing highlights.